Hello, and welcome back to week 10 of Computers in the Studio. As always, this is Kevin. So, in our previous video, we went over text being created specifically from the Layers panel. Today, we will be going over the solids and also masks aspects of the Layers panel. Please be sure to be keeping up with the exercises available on Canvas, as those help you practice the skills being taught in these demonstrations. So what we're going to do first is make our text layer invisible. That way we have a relatively clean workspace. And then afterwards, you're going to right click, new, and then hit on solid. And so you'll have this panel come up with kind of a couple of different settings related to creating a solid. You'll see that you have a name, and we can just call it red solid. That's fine. You'll have a width and a height, and you can make these kind of anything that you want. It would just depend on what you want the actual size of the solid to be. You can also change the units of it. So if I wanted to maybe make it a percentage of the composition, so instead of being the width and the height being 100%, I could set it to 50%, and it will immediately come up with the specific pixel measurements for that. And then if I want it to remain the comp size, so the composition size, I can then click on Make Comp Size, and it will return back to the default settings. So once I hit OK, what you'll see is not only do I have a solid in my Layers panel, but I also now have this folder called Solids within my project folder. And so solids are interesting in the fact that a solid is generally linked. And so what that means is that when I have it show up in other compositions and other places within the project, if I then change that specific solid or the settings of that solid, it will be reflected throughout all the different compositions. So for example, I'm going to create a new composition. I'm going to call this solid example. The settings are fine, we don't need to change anything about it, and then hit OK. And then I'm going to drag my red solid onto here as well. So I have both a layers exercise and a solid example that both have this red solid in it. Afterwards, I'm going to hover over to my red solid, and then I'm going to go to Layer, Solid Settings. And so then my solid settings have come up again. I'm going to maybe this time change my width so that it's a square, so it's 1080 by 1080. You'll see at the bottom that now there's this checkbox called Affect All Layers that use this solid, and that this will change 2 layers. And so if I unclick this, you'll see that now it's called Red Solid 2. And that means that now it's creating something entirely new and it's going to add it to this composition. So I'm going to keep this checked and hit OK. And what you'll see now is that along both of these, solid example and layer exercise, it has changed. And I can go back to this, and then if I hit Command-Shift-Y, which is the shortcut, I can then go back and edit it however I want. So if I then now wanted to change the color, I can hit OK, and then change the color. So we have this figured out about solids, right? It's just kind of, for the time being, it's going to come off as just a rectangle that can be shifted and changed and then linked between compositions. I want you to all click on Layers Exercise and have that be double-click on it and make sure that this is the one that you're selected in. So now what if I want to do more with this solid? I can now add a mask to it and change its shape that way. So by clicking on the rectangle tool, I'm going to double-click, or I'm going to hold and click into it and select the ellipses tool. You want to make sure that you have your purple solid selected in your layers panel. Go into your composition window and then drag out a shape. And you can hold shift so that it sizes proportionally. And now what you see is that I've created a shape using this solid, a mask using this solid, and then this shape is in terms of an ellipses. So with this mask, I can then move it around so that it can inhibit, or it can take up another part of the solid. I can then double click on it and then change its shape. So if I want to make it smaller, or if I want to make it bigger, I can do that. If you end up with a screen like this, where nothing is being shown, at the bottom you might see this red thing saying refresh disabled, release caps lock to refresh. Make sure that caps lock is off, and then you should be able to see it again. That might happen in case you try and click shift to size proportionally and accidentally hit caps lock instead, like I just did. If I then wanted to move both the mask and the solid together, I would select the layers panel. And then within the layers panel, select the purple solid, and then make sure you're selecting the solid itself. Don't click on the line or outside of the path, and you'll see that now I can drag it around. You can then also, similarly to when we were doing text, edit the shape of the mask. So I can then click on this path, and you'll see that the mask shape is shifting and changing. Similarly to before, when I go into my element, I then now have a mask element underneath it, and within that, mask 1. So previously, similarly to type, I can then click on the stopwatch right next to mask path, and then I'm going to go out to about 2 seconds, like previously, and make sure that you have your purple solid selected by itself. You don't want to have the actual mask element selected, you just want the purple solid element selected. And then now, as before, I can shift and change my mask, and over time it'll shift and change with the keyframe. Along with type, or more than type, you can also add a mask feather. So if I want to now blur this out over the course of the 2 seconds, I can do that as well by using mask feather. So hit play, and then now you'll see that over time it's shifting both of these. You can then also expand the mask. So right now it's well within the confines of the path. However, at about 2 seconds, I can then shift it so that it grows larger. Now, the other thing that is cool about solids is that you can actually layer masks together. So I'm going to click on my purple solid in the layers panel, go over to my shape, and maybe this time create a star tool. Go to the star tool. And then now I'm going to drag out a star. And what you'll see is that it's now been added to the previous mask. So now I have mask 1 and I have mask 2. And they're both masking out the solid shape, but they can also both be animated independently. So as you see, my star shape is staying relatively static, while my circle shape has all the animations that we've done to it previously. Now, similarly to the Pathfinder tool, if I go over to mask 2, you'll see that there's an add with a drop down. If I click on this drop down and then do subtract, it's now subtracting the shape from each other. So working very similarly to Pathfinder and Illustrator. This also works for if you import something. So if I wanted to go into my Finder, and I'm going to go to the week 9 materials that I had used previously. I'm going to import them. Make sure that I import them with composition, retain layer size, editable layer styles, and hit OK. I can then grab, for example, this explosion and select on this explosion and then drag out a mask on top of it, like so. Okay, so the final thing that we're going to go over is shape layers. So we're going to make anything else that you have in your layers panel, we're going to make now invisible. And what I want you to do is go over to the shape tool that we've been using previously, and I'm going to drag out, I'm going to select the star tool specifically, but you can drag out any shape. And you'll see that when I then go over to my composition and start to drag it out, you can hold down Shift to make it proportional. I've now made a shape as opposed to a mask. And so with this, you can now edit a lot of properties that you can with text and with solid layers and with masks. If you go into your shape layer, under contents, you'll see a thing called Polystar. And within that, you will see the ability to edit the path, to edit the stroke, and then also to change anchor point, scale, all of the things that we're able to change about other things. But what's also really cool about shape layers is that there's this add arrow to the right, and then from there I can then add other things to make, kind of layer the appearance. Again, similar to the appearance panel within Illustrator. So for example, if I wanted to add a rectangle, you can see that now this rectangle has appeared within the center. And then from this, I can then change things about this rectangle as well. So I can then make it bigger. I can then change the position of it, so moving it to the left or the right, and I can change the roundness of it. So if I want it to be completely round. Along with this, I can then also add, let's say I can add another stroke to it as well. So I have my first stroke, and I'm going to make the stroke 1 width, I'm going to make it maybe 16 pixels. And then with my stroke 2 width, I can then change the color. And then now you see, kind of created a more complex appearance for this shape. I can then also similarly add in other fills or gradients. So I can click on gradient fill, and you'll see that nothing has shown up here, and that is because if you look at your contents, it's all kind of laid out, and it's all really dependent on where everything is located. So if I want the fill to be larger, the gradient fill to be over the original fill, I have to make sure that they're layered properly on top of each other like this. And then I'll look blending modes. So from this, I can maybe hit multiply, and you'll see that now it is mixing with the fill below it, and I can change by pulling on these two little circles how far then the gradient goes out. I'm not going to get into keyframes with this just because there's so much. I went over keyframes previously and you already know how they work, but definitely look at the transform function within your shape layer, and you'll see all of the different things that can similarly be made animatable and made more dynamic. So This is the last thing I was going to go over for this week. Please be sure to look at the exercise and then also look at the homework. And this wraps up week 10 of Computers in the Studio. Please reach out if you have any questions or anything that can further clarify. I will be uploading videos next week. Thank you all. Signing off.